This is Desert Homestead Prepping. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications.
So it's a middle of winter here. Looks like we got some storms that are starting to come in. The backyard at our house here in town, and we got a little bit of snow, but not too much right now. So anyway, I decided that we would talk about the pros and cons of building a structure out of a shipping container, and some of the positives and negatives that we've dealt with. And when it comes to building a structure out of a container, it really depends on what you plan to do with it. Are you going to build it into an actual home? Are you going to put all kinds of, really nice materials into it? Are you going to make it into a cabin like we did? I mean, how much effort and material and money are you going to spend on it? So I kind of decided that I'd go over what we found with our cabin that we have made, and kind of the positives. I think one of the positives for us was the cost, and that's relative really to inflation and deflation and supply and demand, because our shipping containers back when we got them a couple years ago were $3,000 a piece, and that included delivery all the way out into the middle of nowhere. So to buy two of them for $6,000 was really a no-brainer. I mean, to actually build a structure like that would have costed quite a bit more, I think. So the cost at that time was very good. But now, with the breakdown of the supply chain and some of the issues that we've been having around the world, that may not be a positive for you. Last I heard, a container was going for up to like $10,000. So at that price, it may not be a positive. The other thing is it's ready to use. I mean, you buy yourself one 40-foot high cube container for the cost that we paid, $3,000. They bring it, they set it right where you want it, and bam, there you go. It's ready to use. Even if we hadn't cut doors, a door in it, or windows, we knew that we still would have had a shelter out there, and we could have adapted it for emergencies if needed. The other one, which is the garage, we just, boom, it was in place, and we just started putting our materials in there. So there's that plus. The other positive about having a container and building a structure out of it is it's pest proof, or rodent proof. This was very important for us because we struggled with mice getting into our trailers. It seems like these rodents are able to burrow through the undercarriage of trailers, get into little nooks and crannies, and we have to put out traps and struggle to keep those under control. But with the shipping container, it's completely sealed up all the way around. And so as I built the container and cut holes in it for various things, I was very careful to make sure that any holes for wiring was just big enough to get the wire through and seal it up really good. Or for plumbing, or for the windows, make sure that I sealed up the edges really good. So there's no place for these rodents to be able to get in through some of the holes that we've cut in it. And when it comes to wood structures and trailers, even if they are sealed up, they can chew through wood and and through material to be able to get into your structure. So that was a big plus for us, was the fact that it would be pest proof. And it's really nice because when we do go out to the property, we know that there's no rodents or anything in our cabin, and we look and check just to be sure, and there's no sign that they're ever in there. Unfortunately, in our trailers, we do find signs that they've been in there, and we set out traps and we clear them out, but it's an ongoing process keeping those pests and rodents under control. The other positive is building codes. So to build most anywhere in America, you have to follow building codes, because if you're going to build a permanent structure, then then you have to build it a certain way and have a foundation and all this stuff. So with the container, we actually could get around that because it's still classified as a movable structure. So we didn't have to apply for any kind of building codes because it's not mounted to a foundation or anything like that. So we are able to get around those things. Now that may not be the case if you're in a city. I mean, we're not really in city limits, so we don't have to worry about that. And so that goes into the other positive, which is it is movable. So the way that I designed that container is that I could move it if I wanted to. I haven't connected multiple containers together. We've thought about it, but we haven't. It's still basically all intact. I'd have to tie down a few things like the wood burning stove and and stuff like that, prepare it. But if I wanted to, we could move it and just kind of drag that sucker somewhere else on the property. And the only thing that I'd really have to do is unhook the 5 bolts that bolts the roof, the overhang of the roof, to the posts. And then after that, I could just kind of move it around. So it is actually movable. If it really came down to it, with a little bit of modification, we could actually put it on the back of a truck and load it up and take it really wherever we wanted to. So that's some of the positives. Some of the negatives that I'd go through with it is it's kind of difficult to work with a used shipping container, because maybe if you bought a brand new one that had never been used, it wouldn't have any dents in it. But ours, it'd been used, so it had some dents, and the walls weren't perfectly straight. And so when I'm cutting the holes for the windows, I'd cut into it quite a ways and get to a point where all of a sudden that the wall on it, the corrugation would just go ting, and it would pop out, and you'd see how wavy the walls were. So I'd had to do a lot of banging with a sledgehammer and trying to bend it back in place and trying to manipulate it to be able to fit these windows and these doors. There goes the rabbit. Yeah, if anybody's wondering about the bunnies, the cottontail, it escaped many months ago. I never saw it again. And our other rabbit, we put its cage over here, and we set up this other cage around it to give it more room, but we could never keep it in there, and so eventually we just kind of gave up on leaving it in a cage, and we've just let it run around the backyard. So it's been perfectly fine. It hasn't ever left the backyard, and it's been back here for probably 4 months, just having the run of the yard, and it's having a good old time. Bring it out plenty of food and make sure it's got plenty of water. So anyway, getting back on topic here. So yeah, the shipping container was never designed to be built into a livable structure. I mean, the whole thing was designed just for transporting goods, and you know, when you start cutting into it and changing it into something else, you start running into some issues. You know, the other part is the limited space. I mean, if you're gonna start connecting multiple containers together, then yeah, you can get away from the limited space issue. But yeah, we found that it was difficult to really modify it into what we were desiring it to be. So the other negative is we found that there are serious problems with condensation. So we insulated ours on the outside so that we wouldn't take away precious space on the inside, and we also wanted to shield the outside metal from the heat and the cold, and we're glad that we did it that way. But even then, we still run into issues of condensation, especially when there's a drastic change in temperature. And you know, at first, when it happened, we didn't really understand what it was at first. Like I thought my wife had, you know, mopped the floor, and so there were still some wet spots around the edge. And then I started looking, and I realized that the walls were sweating. So this really changed really our plans for what to do on the interior. I'd really just set up wood paneling and was planning to come back and still, you know, put stripping along the tops and really kind of make it look nice. But the condensation caused that paneling to warp, and you know, we're really unhappy with how that turned out. But we realized that we cannot actually seal up the walls, that we have to leave the top parts and the bottom parts with just a little bit of breathing room for ventilation, because if we trap that moisture back there, it's just going to breed all kinds of mold. So that really kind of comes into, you know, how are you going to insulate a container? How are you going to deal with that issue of condensation? So for us, we're just going to leave the bottoms and the top open a little bit, so there can be a little bit of ventilation, because the condensation we've dealt with has really been kind of minimal, and we're in such a dry climate that it dries out pretty quick. But if you were to seal up those walls and you were to insulate that, like with traditional methods of insulation where you frame the inside and you put in the fiberglass insulation and then sealed it up with sheetrock, it would just build up moisture and mold, which is not good for your health. And you know, I had actually looked up articles and videos on the issue, and there were people who had done that very same thing and had no idea that it was building up moisture inside their walls until it was too late. Once it had started to show on the outside what was going on, the whole inside of all these walls was just filled with all kinds of toxic mold, and the damage was so extensive that it was probably very difficult, to salvage the structure. So then you start running into the issue of the cost. I mean, how much does it cost to actually build a structure out of a shipping container? I mean, the cost really comes down to the price and of the actual container, and then the materials you're going to use. So I've seen that people can get around the condensation issue by using, that spray foam insulation and using that and spraying it throughout the whole interior of the structure. But that stuff's expensive. It's very expensive, and that takes your cost up way high. And when I started doing the math, I found that it really just is not cost effective to take a shipping container and then start using that kind of insulation and then framing it like you would frame any wood frame structure and trying to build it into, using the same methods as building a house. I mean, once you get to that point, you might as well have built yourself a wood structure, and you could have made it a lot more roomy than just one shipping container. So you really kind of run into that. That was a huge negative for us. But thankfully, we're in a place where it's not such a huge issue. I think what we're going to do is come back and do shiplap, which was my wife's original idea. I kind of skimped out on cost, but I think the shiplap, if we keep it from being totally sealed, it's going to allow places where air can get in and moisture can get out. So I think that's the plan, is to go back and do that maybe at some point. When it comes down to all of these issues, it really comes down to what you plan to do with the structure. Are you going to get a shipping container and build it into a cabin and use... This dog goes crazy on this tree. Pep, come on. Are you planning to use this shipping container and use, free and salvaged materials to build it into a comfortable cabin like we are? If so, then you know what, it'll probably work out pretty well. I think the total cost so far of our cabin is $8,000, and that's because we did a lot of salvaging, free and cheap used materials, and did all the work ourselves. But if you're planning to take it and get multiple shipping containers and attach them together and then have to, build it like you would any other house, you might as well just build a house. You might as well just build a wood framed structure, and because what you end up with is taking a shipping container and the only thing you're going to do with it is use it for siding. So those are some things to think about when it comes to a shipping container. For us, I think it was the right idea, and we're pretty happy with it. But if we're going to build another structure, I don't think that we're going to do it with the shipping container. I think the next one might actually be a wood frame structure as far as a living space. But we'll see. I mean, that all depends on the cost of containers and how things go. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys to kind of hear some of our experience. You know, it's funny, I get a kick out of this rabbit and the dog, because the dog is just very, very nice to the rabbit, lets the rabbit do its thing, and the rabbit's just happy to stay back here in the backyard. It's kind of a weird situation, but yeah, this is kind of how it is with us. So I think that's it for now. You know, I wish you guys all the best, and everybody else who's trying to work toward their own emergency preparedness and, you know, being able to prepare a homestead for yourself. You know, hopefully some of our ideas are helpful, and, you know, maybe you can learn from a lot of our mistakes and from some of our success.